Hi, I'm Van Aaron Hughes. I am a Denver author of science fiction and fantasy short stories, which have appeared in a bunch of different magazines and anthologies. One of my stories was a winner in the Writers of the Future contest. I have appeared in FNSF, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, a couple times. It so happens that this story in FNSF and the Writers of the Future story both involve aliens. And they're both, if I do say so myself, powerful stories filled with metaphorical import and all that. And they're both too long to read to you today. So luckily, my newest forthcoming story, I'm going to be in FNSF a third time. And that's a story that also has aliens in it. No metaphorical import, not powerful, none of that. It's, in fact, a deeply silly story, but it's short enough that I can read it to you, so that's what you get. This is called Hard. Hard by Van Aaron Hughes. A single father will do just about anything to convince his 13-year-old son he's an awesome dad, not a weeb, you know? So when Noah declared that he really wanted to try curling, that peculiar Olympic event that looks like shuffleboard on a sheet of ice, I promptly looked up the only public curling rink in Denver, only to learn that every other single dad in the state had also been watching the Olympics with their kids and had booked up the rink through the end of the century. Noah told me to stay chill. He had heard from gaming buddies about a curling rink that's pretty saucy, apparently a good thing, no reservations required, and by the way, he had no plans for next Saturday. Which is how I found myself dragging the boy out of bed before dawn, shoving some waffles down his throat, and making the 6-hour drive to the next closest curling rink, on the outskirts of Because This Is Where the Wagons Broke, Nebraska. The drive took nearly as long as the phone call to get my ex to consent to this outing. A side benefit of the long drive was I could get Noah off his gaming console for a whole day. I swear he spends more time with Top Heavy and Slider and Stinky, his online gaming friends, than anyone else. As a dutiful father, I know I should make sure he's hanging out with good kids, but what do you do when your son tells you his best friends don't even live in Colorado? Curling was added as an official Winter Olympic sport in 1998, but had been featured as an exhibition event as early as 1924. So now Americans are exposed to it every 4 years. If there are curling events between Olympiads, only a few Canadians and Scots are aware of it. The drive went easily, as Noah played for me all the slappin' new music groups he's discovered on Spotify, like Foreigner and Styx. Please don't tell him. We stopped for an early lunch on the way, then later for snacks, which I let Noah choose. This resulted in me eating a type of tortilla chip I'd never seen before that tasted like gasoline going down, then a few minutes later felt like someone had ignited the gasoline. Noah explained the chip's appeal. The first few chips taste awesome, so you don't mind the heat. Then they start to taste not quite so good and maybe a little too hot. And after 20 chips, you want your life to end. For the last 15 miles after we turned off I-80, we never saw another car. Noah managed to direct me to the place with no help from the car's navigation system, which refused to acknowledge the existence of the trampled road we were following through the cornfields. There was no town at all, just an isolated curling rink, all by itself, obviously built by an alternate version of Kevin Costner obeying the deranged Canadian voices in his head. If you build it, they will come, eh? The tiny parking lot was empty. The building was empty. Walking in, we saw no other people save for the oddly familiar-looking old man at the counter, who promptly informed us the rink was in use for the next several hours, at least through 4 o'clock. Excuse me, I said, but there's no one else here. Without looking up from the yellowed notebook he was scribbling in, the old man answered, "They'll be here." Noah lost interest in the debate and headed back outside. "There is nobody on the goat path leading here for 10 miles in either direction," I persisted. "These customers aren't of a mind to drive," he said. "There are no houses around here. Are they arriving by helicopter?" He smiled, but his attention remained on his notebook. "I thought you didn't take reservations," I persisted. "Not most days, but these folks have come a long way." "We came from Denver." He nodded. 4 o'clock is what I said." The accent finally gave away why he looked familiar. "Hey, buddy." Still he didn't look up. "Say, Pepperidge Farm remembers." "Kindly blow it out your bunghole, young fella." I went out to see if Noah wanted to wait that long, but he was distracted by the spaceship settling onto the cornfield. Some people doubt whether curling should be considered a sport at all, but they have it exactly backwards. In the Winter Olympics, it is quite obvious which sports are actually pastimes for the wealthy. Downhill skiing, figure skating, snowboard jumping, these are leisure activities during your stay at a luxury condo in St. Moritz. In sharp contrast are the real people sports, the sports invented by the starving, biathlon, cross-country skiing where you stop to shoot your dinner, by the poor, skeleton, sledding for kids who couldn't afford an actual sled, and by the nerds, curling. The brilliant white saucer descended quickly. Before the ship had even finished touching down, alien creatures were tumbling out of it onto the corn. When I say tumbling, that is exactly what I mean. The aliens' bodies are spherical, perhaps 4 feet in diameter, with tentacles protruding from every side. They move by pushing off with the tentacles nearest to the ground and rolling. There is no distinguishing their tops, sides, or bottoms until they stop, which, like Noah, they don't often do. Just keep rolling to wherever they wish to go next. And at that particular moment, where they wish to go was into the rink, onto that sheet of ice. Seeing an alien spacecraft was final proof to me that nothing, no matter how frightening or bewildering, can disrupt parental instincts. My first thought was how terrifying this must be for Noah. I had to protect him and explain to him what was happening as best I could. I turned to Noah to do that, but he was already sprinting back to the rink. Before he could get to the door, one of the aliens wrapped a tentacle around his leg and pulled him to the ground. Scottish museums have curling stones that date back to the 16th century. And let me tell you, Eric von Daniken and the other UFO theorists were all looking in the wrong places. Human beings built the pyramids. We made Stonehenge. We carved and raised the statues on Easter Island. But we did not invent curling. I raced to Noah in horror, but when I reached him, he had already disentangled himself with no evident harm. And he was laughing, as if he roughhoused with medicine ball-shaped alien creatures all the time. Inside the rink, the aliens had already begun to do what they had plainly come to do. They formed themselves into 8 teams of 4 players each. One of the foursomes consisted of 3 aliens and Noah. A few additional humans, also teenagers, had arrived and joined up with other teams. Even though Noah had never curled before, he picked up the game quickly, using the athletic prowess he surely inherited from his mother. Or, I don't know, maybe he had been practicing with some online simulation? Noah insisted he's just OP, whatever that stands for. The aliens on his team, Noah told me the aliens' name for themselves, which I cannot type without a much larger keyboard, translates simply to us. Were directing their shrill screeches at Noah, and he was shouting right back at them and calling them by name. Their names were in us language, but I soon picked up that of the 3 us playing with Noah, one had a body that wasn't quite round. You could see a bulge on top when it was at rest. One didn't roll completely over like the others, but instead would slide along, keeping the same tentacles facing forward, and one smelled a little funny. Well, Noah did tell me his friends didn't live in Colorado. Most of the shouts were directed at the 2 teammates sweeping a given shot. If they needed to sweep faster, the other teammates would yell, "Hard," loudly. Sweeping the ice in front of a moving stone reduces the moisture on the ice, causing the stone to travel further and curve less. On Earth, sweeping was traditionally done with an actual broom made of corn straw. Now humans use a brush with a pad at the bottom. The us swipe the ice with their tentacles. Hours went by with no end in sight for Noah, as apparently his team had qualified for the 4-team playoff. As he wolfed down a giant pretzel between matches, I asked Noah why the us would yell an English word at each other while curling. In the tone of a person explaining the obvious to a child, Noah insisted that the competitors were not speaking any English. Hard is an English word. It's not. Oh, you don't get it, Dad. I believe Noah has trademarked this phrase. For sayings they use a lot, the us run the words together, just using the first sound of each word. Like an acronym. Whatever. Hard is short for something a lot longer. Well, what does it mean? I asked. Noah consulted briefly with Stinky. Something like, sweep that damn ice like your life depends on it because, brother, it might. Additional evidence that curling was already popular in the 16th century is a 1565 painting by Flemish artist Peter Bruegel the Elder, called The Hunters in the Snow. In the painting, a hunting party crests a hill to see many figures in the distance pushing rocks across a frozen lake. Some of the figures are remarkably short and bulbous. I had a difficult time following the progress of the games, but I could tell that Noah's team had made the final match, which was tied going into the last end. Noah's team had the hammer, which Top Heavy threw. After a moment's hesitation, Top Heavy and Stinky started screaming, "Hard! Hard! Hard!" I realized then that hard is not just an instruction for how vigorously to sweep the ice. It's a declaration of unity. The sweepers hear those shouts, and they know their teammates are totally with them. They might have nothing to say each other off the ice, but in that moment, for that purpose, they are all bound by a single goal and passion. With Top Heavy and Stinky shouting at them, Slider's tentacles slapped the ice with a fury. Noah's arms pumped that broom with an intensity I had never before seen in him. The stone slipped past the last guard into the house and nudged the other team's stone sitting on the button. The terminology seems less strange when you realize many of these words are us acronyms. Instantly, a referee, how do I know it was a referee? It wore a striped shirt, duh, jumped out to measure which stone was closer. It pointed at Noah's team, and Noah high-umpteened his teammates with joy. It was only later I learned that, by winning this tournament, Noah and his teammates had qualified for something called the Grand Finals. These are apparently like the Winter Olympics, only much larger, and there is no Jamaican bobsled team. Noah would be one of only a handful of Earthlings ever to compete. Noah's mother hadn't liked the idea of him going to Nebraska for curling. How could I possibly talk her into an off-world curling excursion? Me becoming the most chill dad ever is not a consideration for her. She and I can hardly discuss the weather without losing our tempers, and I'm supposed to get her comfortable with the concept of faster-than-light space travel? You know, divorce sucks. It sucks that the person who used to be closer to you than anyone now can't stand you. It sucks finding a new place to live. It sucks having to reinvent your whole life, your whole identity. But I'll tell you the part that sucks the most. Looking in your son's eyes to tell him his parents are splitting up and knowing that you let him down. I can't let him down again. So my ex and I are going to talk about this. I won't let it turn into another argument. And it occurs to me that while she has become immune to all my dubious charms over the years, she has never wavered in wanting what is best for our son. I just have to get her to realize this trip is what's best for Noah. I'll help her to see how much this means to him. What an amazing opportunity it is for him to visit another world, to be an emissary to a race of beings who are obviously more advanced than we are, notwithstanding their peculiar choices in recreational activities. I will persuade her. Hard. Thanks very much.